Part 4, the crisis of 1942. By mid-1942, Australian Prime Minister John Curtin could be satisfied that he'd been able to bring two divisions back from the Middle East and that the Americans had begun to send troops to Australia. In addition, the Battle of Coral Sea had seen the Japanese invasion force for Port Moresby turned back, but this was only the beginning. The Japanese were determined to capture Port Moresby. The Japanese asserted more pressure when their naval infantry landed near Milne Bay on the 25th of August 1942, seeking to capture the Allied airfields that had recently been constructed there. This was the beginning of what was known as the Battle of Milne Bay. The Japanese had underestimated the number of Allied troops there. There was 9,000 troops as opposed to the 2,000 Marines landed. This included two Australian infantry brigades, the 7th and the 18th Brigades. In addition, the Allies had support by air from the 75th and 76th Squadrons of the RAAF, both equipped with P-40 fighter bombers, which were also based at Milne Bay. Advancing towards the airfields, the Japanese launched a major attack on the 31st of August when they charged the defences manned by the 25th and 61 Australian Battalions and the US 43rd Engineer Regiment and 709th Anti-Aircraft Battery. The Japanese suffered grievously, largely due to machine gun and artillery fire, and they had withdrawn by dawn. By the 4th to 7th of September, the Japanese decided to evacuate and withdraw. This was a major land victory for the Allied forces, and in fact the first time the Japanese had successfully been turned back on land during World War II. The Japanese were still determined to take Port Moresby, and they set about doing so by land. The only way for them to advance to Port Moresby was on foot across the Owen Stanley Range, a series of immense ridges. They established a beachhead on the north coast at Buna and Gona. Then they began their advance toward Port Moresby on the island's southern coast. They knew the Kokoda Track was not passable by vehicles before they began. Their spies had been gathering information on the region from as early as 1931. A small militia force in Port Moresby and also later in Kokoda faced the Japanese. It comprised Papuan Infantry Battalion, the 39th Infantry Battalion Militia, and the 53rd Infantry Battalion. These had been based at Port Moresby. A battalion at that time was up to about 1,000 men, and the 39th Battalion was based at Kokoda. MacArthur refused to believe the size of the force of the Japanese, which began at 5,000 and increased to about 14,000, and the militia were hard pressed in initial battles to hold off the Japanese along the track. There were a number of early actions between the 28th of July and the 10th of August, where Australian troops fought to hold the Kokoda village and airstrip, eventually having to retreat to Daniki. The battle for Isarava, 26th to 31st of August, was considered the defining battle where the 39th Battalion and reinforcements made a valiant stand against far superior numbers. The battle for Brigade Hill, effigy, 8th of September, a major engagement where the Australian Brigade was broken up by a Japanese flanking attack, causing a retreat towards Port Moresby. Senior leadership began the blame game, with MacArthur blaming Blamey and even the Australian troops without having any clear idea of the facts, the terrain and the vast superior numbers of the Japanese forces. Port Moresby was in danger again. The Battle of Iruaba was the furthest point of the Japanese advance, where Australian forces held a ridge just 8 kilometres from the final ridge before Port Moresby. But things were about to change due to a number of key factors. The Japanese supply lines were stretched, the Allied bombing along the Kokoda Trail was severely affecting their ability to bring supplies forward. In addition, the Japanese now had another fight on their hands at the Guadalcanal. The American capture of the Japanese aerodromes at Guadalcanal was also a major factor and would lead to another major area of conflict. The Japanese had no choice but to draw their reserves away for this looming battle. Journalist Damien Para made a film, Kokoda Frontline, based on his own efforts on the Kokoda Trail. It won an Academy Award and captured jungle fighting in all its detail for the first time.
Eight days ago, I was with our advanced troops in the jungle, facing the Japs at Kokoda. It's an uncanny sort of warfare. You never see a Jap even though he's only 20 yards away. They're complete masters of camouflage and deception. I should say about 40% of our boys wounded in those engagements haven't seen a Japanese soldier, a live one anyway. Don't underestimate the Jap. He's a highly trained soldier, well disciplined and brave. And although he's had some success up to the present, he's now got against him some of the finest and toughest troops in the world.
Within an hour, these fresh troops, AIF units with splendid battle records won in the Middle East, will be in contact with the Japanese. They move up through the dim, dank, steaming jungle. Fire at sounds. Japs are believed to have used that hut. Machine gun bullets search for any seeking escape.
The counter-attack had begun. At the Battle of Eora Creek, or Templeton's Crossing, in October, a critical, hard-fought battle occurred during which the Australian counter-attacked, breaking the Japanese withdrawal after a very difficult campaign, which also involved a number of well-known officers such as Basil Caturns, who won the Military Cross for his efforts. From mid-November 1942, exhausted, battle-weary Australians and inexperienced American troops began a brutal and uncompromising 2-month campaign against the Japanese-held beachheads at Gona, Buna and Sanananda. The Allies' attack stalled against desperate Japanese defenders and their labyrinth, desperate Japanese trenches. The swamps and jungles of the Papuan coast compounded the already difficult task facing the Allies. In these conditions, conventional tactics and fire support were rendered ineffective, forcing commanders to adapt operations on the ground. Gona fell on the 9th of December 1942, but the battle for the other beachheads continued into late January 1943. This photo of young, dead American troops on the beach at Buna in 1943 caused a great deal of controversy and sensation when it was published on the cover of Life magazine in 1943. 1942 saw Australia see through the crisis of Japanese advancing south, but it had cost many Australian lives and casualties. The troops continued on in their fight in the Southwest Pacific. There were many hard campaigns ahead in Bougainville, Borneo, at land, in the air and at sea before the war came to an end in August 1945.